Thank you for that, and I agree with you. And for this specific bill, we hear a lot about the different school choice models. What makes the education savings account model in SB2 better than previous school choice efforts?
Well, you know, it's not, nobody cuts a check to a parent. There's not a debit card. There's not all the fears and some of the rhetoric you hear, it's all about that. These dollars are held in trust by the comptroller, and then they're dispersed to the Certified Education Assistance Organization that runs the program, and then funds are used to pay on behalf of parents for tuition or services, therapies on that. So it's tightly controlled to prevent any sort of fraud or abuse. And it's more parent-directed. It provides more options for parents.
More options for parents is always good.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And after the pandemic, there were a lot of things that came about in public education. So why do you think it's more important now, even after the pandemic, that we implement school choice?
Yeah, I think you can look around the state. You can talk to schools across the state and even look even around the country. And you can find significant challenges now that we have in our schools. You know, learning loss from kids that miss school. Some of our younger kids sort of got used to not going to school. And so it's created specific challenges in our public schools. And I think now what this bill provides is an all-hands-on-deck approach to making sure that families have an opportunity, whether it be in terms of catching kids up for learning loss, whether it be from challenges with peer groups or bullying or social issues that kids have at school. This again gives them an option. And it appears to have magnified since COVID. I won't speculate of why that is, but it certainly seems to be more concern from parents following the COVID pandemic.
Thank you for that. And also, let's talk about competition. We know there's competitions among schools when we do have these options available, but how does it help Texas compete nationally with education innovation?
Well, you know, we have so much to offer as a state, and whether it be our economic development, our business climate, and what, you know, really the factors, you know, low regulation, you know, less taxes, the things that business looks for. But you can't sustain that without a top-tier education system. And the reality is it takes more than just a current system to provide that. You know, there are children now that are struggling in their environment who, if placed, and often you'll see this when placed in a different environment, they thrive. And who knows what that child will achieve when they are allowed and their parent can direct them to the environment that fits their needs best. What sort of innovation it will be unlocked in the brain of that youngster? We don't know yet, but we do know that that will happen when parents have more choice.
I agree, Chairman. And so what would you say to someone who worries that SB2 will hurt public schools?
You know, you have not seen anywhere in the country where public schools have been impacted in a negative way by school choice. You just haven't. And this bill will not impact our public schools. When you are providing the services and you're meeting the needs of children, we know that parents will stay in their public school. Even in a universal program, this is a significant decision for a parent. You know, this is often, if you'd have been like our family, I have no one in my immediate family or my parents or grandparents or anybody else except for like 2 cousins that ever went to a private school. I don't know that much about that, but I do know that this opportunity that we will provide will not hurt our public schools. It'll just create another lane or another option for parents. And, you know, I think it's a really good question. I think what happens sometimes, and I've used this analogy in the hearings, is our public schools really are asked, in a medical analogy, to be a general practitioner and a neurosurgeon at the same time. That's a hard lift, you know, and when there is or issues with students and parents lack the satisfaction or there's an agreement between a school and a parent that the child's needs aren't being met, or we need to do, it's just, again, another pathway for a parent to choose to get their child in the right setting.
Thank you, Chairman. There's been a lot of discussion about this over the last few months, good, bad, and indifferent. What do you think is the most misunderstood thing about ESAs?
Oh man, the most misunderstood. There really is so much. I think that it is an existential threat to public schools. You just haven't seen that anywhere. I have superb confidence in our public schools to continue to provide incredible education for their kids. They did for mine, and they've done for many on this floor, and they will continue to do so. But I also understand that, you know, I don't necessarily have to get to make the call what's best for your kid or some other parent's children. And so when you have this sort of opportunity and you really empower the parent to do so, I've always said that a choice typically results in more satisfaction. When I have to make that deliberate step, apply for an ESA, take my child to a private setting, then at that point, maybe what it has done is invested me in the outcomes that we want. You know, why that doesn't happen in the public school setting for them, I don't know. But I know in many times what you'll see when you talk to families at Oak Creek Academy, that smaller setting typically, it really invites more parent engagement, and you see children that were struggling really begin to thrive.
Well, if you could expand upon that a little bit further, how would this bill change the day-to-day reality for parents and students?
You know, I think when we all sit down and and our kids, this is what goes on a lot in Texas. You know, we think about where we live, what that school we're zoned for is, right? Then we're like, well, do we want to go to that school? Well, we might want to go to another school. So we think about, can we get a transfer? Do we have to move? You know, can we move? Can we afford to move? Is there a charter school nearby? You know, all this is going on, right? I've got a 4-year-old grandson in Fort Worth, and right now, that's what my daughter and son-in-law are doing. They're thinking, all right, when Leo is old enough, what's going to fit, right? What's going to fit for him? Well, when you think about parents and having to make these decisions, this is going to provide one more option. And they think about, all right, maybe it is the local public school. Maybe we'll move to this. Maybe we'll transfer there. Maybe we'll pick this charter. Or maybe we'll exercise our right and go through the ESA process and be able to take our child to a setting that fits their needs best.
Well, as a mother, an auntie, and eventually a grandmother, I thank you for bringing the bill. Thank you.
Ms. Troxclair, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman
The
yield for
gentleman
questions?
yield for questions. The gentleman yields.
All right, Chairman Buckley. I want to talk about something that has been absolutely, continually misreported by the media. We have heard over and over again, often by people who are opposed to school choice, that this bill will only benefit wealthy families. Can you remind us one more time who benefits from an education savings account in this bill?
This bill is prioritized for special needs children with an income cap and a progressive income cap throughout the prioritizations. It's income-based.
And can you,
Needs
I'm
and
sorry,
income-based.
Can we have a little order? I'm having a hard time hearing him.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rail.
Thank you. So has it surprised you during this time that false claim has been repeated over and over again in the media, and nobody in the media has corrected that claim?
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's kind of a class warfare argument, I think, and it just, I'm at the local private school, Oak Creek and Killeen, all the time, and whether it be as a state representative or a veterinarian, bringing a dog up there on career day or attending events, and these are not millionaire families. These are families they're working. These are families where dad's in the military, mom works fast food, and grandma's moved down to help her so that the mother can take a second job, so they can afford an opportunity at a school that's really where their child is thriving. And so, I think that, on the surface, that's the argument, but it just doesn't bear out anywhere anywhere where you see education savings accounts.
So it's a convenient talking point, but it is in no way reality, because in reality, students with special needs and low-income students are first, second, and third in line under this bill, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I'd also, as a member who represents both suburban and urban counties, and suburban, urban, and rural, I have been really shocked and disappointed in how these false talking points have proliferated through our rural communities and been used as scare tactics to protect the urban areas who really are not living up to students' and parents' expectations. Most of the students, isn't it true that most of the students across the 32 plus other states that have already enacted some sort of school choice program, the students that benefit most from those programs are typically urban area students that are seeking a way out of a potentially failing public school?
Yeah, that's what you see across the country, and I think what you have in those areas are parents that are seeking this sort of relief, this sort of option. And when you have that, you have to turn to the rural areas where, I'll stipulate, people love their public schools in rural Texas.
Absolutely.
We just passed a bill that provides the largest influx of money to rural public schools in the history of the state. And
The gentleman's time has expired.
I'll make a motion to extend his time.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? Chair hears none. The gentleman's time is extended.
So our rural areas have nothing to fear from school choice. They are sort of that hotbed of where our Texas values live, and often that school is sort of that hub of activity. And so I think the argument that is made about that really seeks to sort of counter what I believe, and what you've seen in some of the polling, is that in some of our underserved communities, school choice is very popular.
And you brought up a good point that most rural communities, they love their small rural schools because the teachers and administrators in those schools share the same values. Whereas when you get into the larger school districts in the urban areas, sometimes there is just a disconnect between the students that they have a responsibility to serve and the educational outcomes. Because at the end of the day, this is not about protecting a system. It's not about protecting a certain district. It's about doing what is best for our kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you will see throughout our discussion today that most of the studies show that educational outcomes for all students, including public school students, actually improve in areas that a school choice program has been adopted. Is that true?
That is correct.
So what you're telling me is that if you care about children, if you care about students, any student, regardless of whether they're homeschool, private school, public school, I think everybody in this chamber cares about Texas students. And we know now that enacting these programs increases outcomes. And when you break a cycle where a student is not getting the education that they need, education is the most important thing, most important indicator for the future of their life, right? If they don't get a good education, they're less likely to live a successful life and go out and be able to fulfill their own dreams, right?
That's right.
And so by allowing students who are in the most need, special needs students, low income students, students who their traditional public school is not meeting their needs, by allowing those students and those parents the opportunity to get an excellent education, that is not just helping them during their formative years, but it is setting them up for success in the rest of their lives.
That is correct. There's nothing more important for our future than educating our kids. And why in the world would we look at options and say we can do this one and that one, but we can't do that one? Why can't we do that one? Because we're just not going to do it. It's time to provide a full array of different of options for parents, with the understanding of how unique our children are and the challenges they will face. And so without an option like this, then we're literally looking at another option, and we're saying to some kids in Texas and families, no, sorry, not for you. And that's just not right.
So my last question to you is, why should every member in this chamber feel confident in voting for this bill?
Because it's right for kids.
Thank you.
Mr. Romero, for what purpose?
Does gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Chairman, I've got a couple of questions regarding the eligibility criteria, but before I do that, I want to ask you a question about some of the questions that you just answered.
Okay.
You did say that this program is income-based, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but yet you didn't mention, or the prior member said this is not for the wealthy, you agreed, and this is not for millionaire families. So is there an income cap?
No, but it's prioritized by income.
Okay, but a moment ago, when the prior member asked questions saying this was not for millionaire families, you agreed that this is not for millionaire families. So do you agree that this program is not for millionaire families?
I believe that you will see more middle-class Texas families access this program than any other segment.
Okay, regardless of whether it's more or not, but this is available, and Texas should know that this voucher program is being made available to millionaires, people that could potentially make $1 million a year. Is it still available to those families?
But and that income level is capped.
Okay, so at what cap in your bill, can you tell me where the income level is that you believe is not for the wealthy? What is the maximum income level at which your voucher bill is now going to allow for a family in Texas to take part in this program?
Well, the income levels, as I described, begin with students with disabilities, and then
No, I'm asking the
you're talking about on
question.
the high end.
I'm asking, what is the maximum amount of income at which you are no longer available, or you are no longer eligible to receive a voucher, public schools, public taxpayer dollars, because in this building we talk a lot about lowering taxes. Ultimately, this comes from all people in Texas. What is the maximum amount of income a family can earn at which they are still eligible to receive this voucher program?
Under Priority 4, it's families earning $160,000 a year or more.
That's under Priority 4. Are you telling me that Priority 4 is the maximum amount, so therefore no one that makes over $140,000 a year combined income?
No, it's reserved. It's prioritized for families earning more than $160,000 per year, and it's capped at 20% of the program.
Okay, it's 20%. So what's the cap? Is it 160 to 200? Is it 160 to 250?
It's not capped. It's universal. All families are eligible in that priority.
Okay, so then back to my prior question. Will a family that makes $1 million a year or more, are they still eligible?
They're eligible to apply.
Okay, so then a millionaire family will. A billionaire family would still be eligible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to ask you some questions regarding the
yeah.
eligibility criteria. Under SB 2, your bill does require proof of citizenship or lawful admission into the United States, correct?
Yes, sir.
And under this bill, who is responsible for making immigration status determinations?
It is done through the application process.
That application process happens where?
It happens when the family applies through the Certified Education Assistance Organization.
So this is an outside vendor?
It is one, could be one of several that the comptroller would contract with via RFP.
Okay, and does your bill intend to adhere to the Immigration and Nationality Act's definition for lawfully admitted?
Yes, if they're lawfully admitted, they're eligible.
So are you aware that someone that can be lawfully present, even if they are not lawfully admitted into the United States? For example, they could be present with a green card. They could have protections under the Violence Against Women's Act. They could have special immigrant juvenile status. They could have DACA. They could be asylum seeker or grantee, or they could have temporary protective status and U visa. Is it your intention to exclude children lawfully present in the U.S. from vouchers that qualify under those programs?
All the bill requires that they be a United States citizen or lawfully present.
Isn't it the responsibility of making determinations regarding a person's lawful or unlawful presence under immigration law the exclusive responsibility of the federal government?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Isn't it the responsibility of making determinations regarding someone's lawful or unlawful presence under immigration law the exclusive responsibility of the federal government?
I'm not advised on the process. That is up to the applicant to prove they're a United States citizen or legal resident.
And to your prior response, they are going to be presenting this information to someone that is not of the federal government. So the vendor, will they be required to be a part of some federal government institution, since they are going to be providing information, or persons seeking to be a part of your voucher program are going to be providing that documentation status?
Yeah, they will verify that they are citizens or lawfully present.
What documents will they be required to establish
Yeah.
their presence or lawful admission?
Documents provided by the applicant.
Those are the documents provided by the applicant,
Yeah.
but what documents do you expect them to provide?
Well, they can provide your standard documents where you prove your citizenship or legal status in any occasion of transacting business in Texas.
And what are those? I mean, it's in your bill. That's why I
Yeah.
want to know,
Yeah.
Dr. Buckley, if you're asking for them to prove the status, there's concern that they have to prove status. You've mentioned that it's going to go to an outside vendor. You haven't told me, other than tell me that it's through the comptroller, but you haven't instructed in this legislation what I believe should be a requirement, because right now you should only have to prove your status to the federal government. But I'll move on. How will this organization in the comptroller's office, if you have knowledge of it, ensure that these documents are properly protected, that they're safely protected?
The organizations that operate as a certified education assistant organization have privacy guards and protections for all personal information that is required for this for application.
Is that in your bill?
Yes.
Can you tell me what line of your bill it is that specifies
Yeah.
what information and how it will be protected?
I'm sorry, repeat your question.
Can you tell me what line in the bill
Yeah.
and where it is, the documents that should be provided, and where they will be protected? Where and how they will be protected?
They will be protected per state and federal law in terms of personal information.
Will any schools be charged with the responsibility?
I'm sorry?
With the responsibility of verifying or confirming status?
No, that will be done in the application process.
For the sake of time, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to come up and I'm going to see if you can point to me in the bill where that information regarding the protection of those documents are.
Mr. Anchia, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield for some questions about the bill?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Yeah.
Will Will the gentleman yield for questions? Brad, will the gentleman yield for questions?
I yield, sorry.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley. Just have a few more questions about how to qualify and how to show your immigration status. You know, we have heard a lot of discussion on HB3 about parental choice, but the section that Chairman Romero was asking about explicitly excludes parents from participating in the program that they pay into based on their willingness or ability to show citizenship or immigration status. Is that correct? So
That
if
is
somebody
correct.
didn't want to provide immigration documents, then they would be excluded from the bill, right?
Yeah, that is correct. You have to prove citizenship.
And if they couldn't provide immigration documents, they'd be excluded from the bill, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Will there be exceptions? Are you going to be taking exceptions or have a perfecting amendment for students who have difficulty accessing personal documents? I'll give you an example. I didn't have my birth certificate for many, many years. My parents had it. A lot of times, children in foster care have difficulty accessing their documents. Students who are homeless have difficulty accessing their documents. And students, many times who have been kicked out of the house, have difficulty accessing their documents. Are there going to be any exceptions for those classes of students?
They need to follow state and federal law in producing documents to prove their citizenship and whether or not they're legally present.
But if they're unable to, no exceptions, they cannot
Yeah,
participate.
They have to provide their, yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to delve into a few, because your bill, as Chairman Romero pointed out, used the term lawfully admitted, and you mentioned that it was your intention for the bill to adhere to the Immigration and Nationality Act definition for lawfully admitted. I wanted to go through a few statuses of people that would be lawfully present but potentially not lawfully admitted. So are you aware that victims of violence that have what are called VAWA, Violence Against Women Act green cards, are usually subjected, that you have to make a finding of battery or extreme cruelty? That definition excludes green cards holders. Would that classification of women be ineligible for the green card program because they are technically not lawfully admitted, but they are lawfully present?
I'm not advised on that particular circumstance that you
Okay.
bring up.
So it is your understanding then that you can be lawfully present in the United States but not lawfully admitted under the Immigration and Nationality Act, right?
It sounds that.
That does happen to be the case.
Did they have the?
It is also the case with U visas. U visas are only granted to crime victims in the United States who aid in the prosecution of a crime, and this definition that you have of lawfully admitted would exclude U visa recipients as well. Are you aware of that?
I'm not
Okay.
advised of the details of that.
Are you aware that children who are here with special immigrant juvenile status protections, they oftentimes are abused, abandoned, or neglected by a parent, that those children who need access to mental health and counseling services, your definition may exclude these children from the voucher program? Are you aware of that?
I'm not advised. If
Okay.
they're U.S. citizens
And
or legally
children-
present, they're eligible.
And I just want to
Yeah.
point out
I got you.
that there are people who are lawfully present in the United States, but may not, under your definition of lawfully admitted, be covered by the voucher program. And I think you want to get at people who are here lawfully, like people with TPS protections, temporary protective service, right? Pardon me, status. They've experienced natural disasters in their country, political turmoil in their home country, Cuba, Venezuela. Your definition also excludes them. I just wanted to make you aware if you were not aware of that. Are you aware?
I'm not advised.
Okay. And finally, children who seek asylum, who have had to flee their home country due to political prosecution or prosecution due to religious beliefs, like, for example, Yazidi Christians, who may be here as asylees. Your definition excludes them. Were you aware of that?
I'm not advised of their
Okay.
status.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I just wanted to get that in the record.
Okay, thank
Mr. Reynolds, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for some
Will the
questions?
gentleman yield for questions?
you. I do.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley. I appreciate you and the thoughtful explanations that you have. You know, sometimes bills have unintended consequences, so I want to ask you a series of questions to really alleviate some concerns that many of my constituents and stakeholders have that this bill has a discriminatory impact, okay? And so, are you aware that in Indiana, researchers have concluded that the introduction of vouchers in 2013 has increasingly benefited higher income white students, many of whom are already in private schools, and diverts funding from all other students who remain in public schools in the school system. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of the individual demographics of participants in Indiana.
Okay. Are you aware that simply an analysis from an Ohio newspaper using data provided by the Ohio Department of Education found that the state's voucher programs disproportionately served white students? Are you aware of that?
I am not.
Are you aware of the Century Foundation report reviewing the impact of private school vouchers nationwide found that voucher programs are more likely to increase school segregation than to promote integration or maintain the status quo? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar because we don't have a system in Texas.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Texas. Are you aware that currently Texas private schools disproportionately serve Anglo students? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of the demographics of our
Okay.
private schools.
Well, here are some of the demographic data that I found. That according to the most recent data, white students are the majority population in private schools in Texas, comprising 55% in 2022 as compared to 26% in public schools. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that, like I said, demographic data concerning private schools.
Are you aware that African American and Latino students attend private schools at lower rates than Anglo students? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of those demographics.
And the data that I received showed that only 13% of public school population in Texas are
Gentleman's
black.
time has expired.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Reynolds, for what purpose?
motion to extend the time.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? The chair hears none. The gentleman's time is extended.
Thank you. Chairman Buckley, are you aware of data that shows that 13% of the public school population in Texas is black and 53% of the public school population is Latino? Are you aware of those statistics?
Was that public schools?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Okay. And are you aware that only 6% of private schools are African American populated students and 23% of Hispanic students in private schools? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of those demographics.
Okay. Does it concern you that, let me strike that, has this body adequately considered the very likely possibility that this legislation will disproportionately benefit white students and create more segregation in our schools?
That is not the intent of this legislation. It's my intent that this gives every Texas family the opportunity to select the education that is the best fit for their child.
What protections does this bill have to ensure that we don't fund segregation in our public schools?
Yeah. When you look across all the states, first of all, there's throughout the process, there's no discrimination on who can apply and such. But we also find that across the country, when you look at programs, that you see significant populations of Hispanics and African Americans that attend private school and that are accessing through ESA programs. And the intent of this bill is to give parents, regardless of immutable characteristics, the opportunity to access the education that's best for their child, Mr. Reynolds. That's what this bill does.
So, Chairman Buckley, when I looked at the proposed section 29.370 of the bill, which establishes an annual reporting requirement For each certified educational assistance organization, I see that subsection 1 requires educational assistance programs to collect and compile data regarding program applications disaggregated by age, but not by any other factors outlined in proposed section 29.3715. Isn't that correct?
The intent of the section is to make sure that the report reports back to the legislature of the participants in the program.
Okay. And I'm just trying to make sure that there wasn't a drafting error. Can you explain why other factors such as disability, status, or race, gender, socioeconomic status are not included in this annual reporting requirement for this application?
Well, the application process would certainly require verifying disability status because one of the priority groups. But again, the process and the reporting is required to make certain that we know who is accessing the program.
Is it your intention, or it's my understanding, is your intention that this legislation be a universal voucher, correct?
Yes, every Texas family is eligible to apply given the eligibility requirements.
And so your goal, as you just expressed, is to increase the opportunity for all students, including marginalized students, correct?
Absolutely.
So we have heard many concerns from a variety of stakeholders about the potential discriminatory impact from this legislation. Do you agree with me that one way that we could mitigate these concerns would be to monitor and evaluate which students are having success in exercising their right to receive funding for their preferred private school and which ones are not? Wouldn't that be helpful?
I believe that it is important that the program reports information about students and primarily that it provides access to all students, and it does. There is no Texas student that is not eligible.
Chairman Buckley, are you
Yeah. And
aware
yeah.
of the Texas Bill of Rights?
Yeah. Well, let me bring you to the report that must include the following demographic information: the child's grade, the child's age, the child's sex, the child's race or ethnicity, the school district in which the child resides, the district campus that the child would otherwise attend, the child's zip code, the date of enrollment in the program. All of that is reported by the comptroller based upon the bill.
Thank you. I'm making a note of that.
Yeah, yeah, page 35 of the bill.
So, with respect to the students who can be denied admittance from private schools, you do know that there are different requirements for admittance from a public school versus a private school, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it true that a private school may deny a student admission on the basis of their religious practices or identity? Isn't that correct?
No, that simply private schools will make parents aware of certain religious requirements or certain religious activities, and the parent can decide whether or not they would like their child to attend.
Isn't it true that 75% of private schools in Texas are religious?
I'm not sure of that breakdown, but that's probably about right.
Okay. But you don't have any evidence to dispute that, would you?
I don't.
In other words, is it almost certain that the state will be funding religious discrimination to the tunes of millions of dollars that would otherwise be going to our public schools, which are constitutionally prohibited from discriminating against any student for any reason, correct?
The private schools will not discriminate based on that, and I don't believe that makes that bears itself out, that it's religious, that it's discriminatory based on religious tests.
If it's a Christian private school, do they have to admit a Muslim private school student?
I'm sorry?
If it's a Christian private school, do they have to admit a student that is a Muslim student? Do they have to admit that student to their school?
Yeah. They will make sure that that's a fit. They'll advise parents of the requirements of that student to attend that school, and that's the way the process works.
Isn't it true that a private school may deny admission on the basis of a disability?
No, we've hashed this out in our committee hearings. That's a great question, by the way. What private schools do is they make certain that they can provide the services that are necessary to serve that child. And we have we have 60-something private schools in Texas that are accredited to make sure that they particularly serve children with special needs, and including one in my own district. And we even had testimony from families that applied to certain schools, and they would say, you know what, there might be a better private school option, and they would give parents an option because they want to make sure it fits for the kid. They understand that if they can't provide the services they think, but they know an additional school or another school could do that, then they direct the parent that direction.
But isn't it true that private schools are not required to provide language access services to emergent bilingual students?
Private schools in our Catholic system and others have very robust and rich language courses and the ability. I mean, if you look at our Spanish speakers and stuff in our Catholic schools, there are, I don't know the exact percentage, but I do know that it's a large percentage of students that speak other languages other than English.
Isn't it true that a private school may deny a student admission on the basis of their gender?
Well, there are some schools that are sort of set up to be either all male or all female, but that is, again, and that's a parent has that, they have that right to decide, and they'll choose the right one based on the child's gender.
Could the private school also deny student admission based on sexual orientation or gender identity?
I'm not advised about that.
Given the multiple and often intersecting ways of this legislation will find discrimination, how does it comply with the Texas Constitution's equal educational opportunity mandate?
This bill provides every Texas parent, every single one of them, an option to apply for an education savings account and take their child to the setting that fits them best. Mr. Reynolds, what's so fundamentally different about what we're doing here is we're empowering parents to make those decisions, and we're giving them options. And I think what's even more important, they will receive options that best fits their child.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley.
Sure. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Sorry.
Can I make a motion to
Ms.
extend?
Leo, members, you've heard the motion. It requires unanimous consent. Is there objection? There is objection. The gentleman's time is not extended. Mr. Romero, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, could I ask to have the exchange between Chairman Buckley, myself, Chairman Anchia, and Chairman Buckley reduced to writing and placed in the journal?
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? The chair hears none, so ordered. Members, we're waiting on an amendment. Ms. Troxclair, for what purpose?
Can the previous exchange, the full exchange from beginning to end, be reduced to writing and put in the journal?
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? The chair hears none, so ordered. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Buckley.
The chair recognizes Mr. Buckley to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a perfecting amendment that clarifies a few items and adds some additional guardrails that members have asked for. And it does the following. It clarifies that children of active duty military are included in eligibility. It requires that accredited private schools have operated a campus for 2 years before they could accept an ESA student. We strengthen the 20% cap on the fourth priority. We improve auditing provisions to improve accountability and transparency in the program. We make it clear that if a student returns to a public school, that they receive what they're entitled to plus 10%, just like a current public school student PEG grant. We ensure that the comptroller shares the annual report, including assessment scores, with the TA commissioner. It includes data reporting on students with disabilities that leave a private school. Per the report, it clarifies that. It's in the bill already. And lastly, there are some edits from the comptroller's office to ensure the agency has the flexibility in administering the program. And I move adoption.
Dr. Allen, for what purpose?
May the gentleman answer a few questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions? On the amendment, Dr. Allen?
I'm sorry.
On the amendment,
Yes, it all goes together. It's on
the gentleman yields for questions.
Yes. I yield.
the amendment. How much money is in the budget for the voucher program?
That's not in this amendment.
Questions have to be limited to the actual amendment that has been laid out.
Well, he was talking about the money going back from the school, so I wanted to know how much money was in the budget.
Say $1 billion. Yeah. $1 billion. What?
Okay, okay. Are you aware that there are enough private schools to absorb, and I'll take my district, one of my districts, which is Houston Independent School District. I'll take it with 180,000 kids in that district. Are there enough private schools out there to absorb 180,000 kids in HISD?
I don't believe that if every child left HISD, there would be enough private school openings for them.
No, so right off the bat, that means not every kid has an opportunity to take advantage of the voucher program.
Yeah, parents can certainly apply, and there are private school opportunities in Houston, and those parents have the opportunity, and they're included in this program.
Every child?
Every child.
Every child. We can take all of the kids in HISD and put them in a private school.
No, ma'am. First of all, I don't believe that all the kids in HISD would choose to leave. But if they all did, if they all chose to leave, they would. There are not enough open private school seats for that.
No, so that simply means that every child does not have an opportunity to take advantage of this program.
Yeah. Every child is eligible to apply for the program.
Okay. What amount in the budget is for special education?
Oh, goodness. We added today on the bill that you voted for, and thank you very much, we added more than $1 billion in additional funding for special education.
So there's another billion?
Yes, ma'am.
A separate billion, so now it's $2 billion, right? Is that what you're saying?
No, are you referring to special education funding in public schools?
Special education in the private schools.
No, there's $1 billion in the budget for the
Total.
For the ESA program total. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I
Okay,
misunderstood your question.
Okay. And there are opportunities for the special education kids to go to private school.
Yes, ma'am. They are actually priority number one in this bill. They are the first students in line.
Okay. What about students with severe disabilities, such as tube feeding, bus transportation, breathing apparatuses, diaper changing? Is that opportunity available in private schools?
It is in some private schools. We have 50 accredited private schools in Texas that have extensive programs for students with disabilities.
Okay. And you have transportation for those kids?
Yeah,
Like
transportation.
ambulances and-
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Transportation expenditures are eligible under this bill.
Okay, and how many kids will you think that they will serve?
I'm not, yeah.
Excuse me?
Members, we are on the perfecting amendment by Dr. Buckley, not the bill.
It has to do with the money, and that's why I'm asking the question. Because you said the monies will go back to the school. I'm asking these questions. It's about the money. I asked you about how much money was there. Will the money take care of special ed kids? I'm asking about the money.
Yeah. Dr. Allen, there's $1 billion appropriated in our budget for this bill.
Okay. What is the average cost of a private school? Average cost of a private school?
Dr. Allen, that is not in this perfecting amendment. I'll be happy to have a discussion with you about everything else on the bill if I can adopt this amendment.
I want everybody to hear, not just me. We don't have a private conversation. I want everybody
No.
to hear.
I'll do it at the mic. I mean, we can have this conversation after adoption of this amendment so that we get the amendment adopted.
I'll wait on you.
Move adoption.
Dr. Buckley sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. There's a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Dr. Buckley voting aye. Show Mr. Leach voting aye. Show Mr. Reynolds voting aye. Show Mr. Schatzline voting aye. Show Mr. Morgan voting aye. Show Ms. Schaffner voting aye. Show Mr. Hopper voting aye. Have all voted. Show Mr. McQueenie voting aye. Show Ms. Pearson voting aye. Show Ms. Luther voting aye. Show Mr. LaHood voting aye. Have all voted. There being 145 ayes, 1 nay, the amendment is adopted.
The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Dutton.
Chair recognizes Mr. Dutton to explain the amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, if I had to title this amendment, it would be called Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is. Because what this amendment does, well, let me start with what the bill does. The bill says they're going to give all these kids $10,500, essentially. Now, that's one size fits all. And usually I can tell you around here, when we've had one size fits all, it means it fits nobody. And essentially what this does is says that they recognize, or at least acknowledge, that there are some children who are in a 12-foot hole. And so what we do with this bill is we offer them a 10-foot rope. And so what my amendment does is simply says that, wait a minute. And I crafted the amendment so it spends exactly the same amount of money that's in the bill for this, $1 billion. Well, let me tell you how I do it versus how this bill does it. If you are 200% or below poverty, what my amendment does is says we will pay the full tuition of the private school up to $30,000. Now, if you really think that children ought to be given an option to go to private schools, I can't think of a better way to do it than increase the money that's in this bill, because we all know that $10,500 is not going to get him there. But $30,000 might. And then what it does is it says that, okay, what we'll do is for children who are from families that are only 300% of the poverty guidelines, we will pay $10,000. If the child is above, if the family is above 300% of poverty, we pay $7,500. And if you happen to be at least above the poverty percent by 400, we pay $5,000. And the amendment also says that if you are 500% above the poverty guidelines, we pay nothing. We pay absolutely nothing because you can afford to do that yourself. Now, what we found out in committee is that the way the bill is drafted, 172,500 children are going to take advantage of this who are already going to private school. And so what my amendment does is says, wait a minute, if we really want to do this, if we really want to help children who need the help, let's do it so that their income levels determine their eligibility. And that's really what my amendment does, rather than do it the way the bill does it, because the bill says that we're going to give everybody $10,500 and we try to do it based on some income levels. But that's not enough to get you to a private school. And I think all of us in here recognize that. And so what I try to do is make this whole idea about about private schools and ESAs work. Because typically what's going to happen is we're going to pass this bill with the way this is currently drafted, and nothing will happen except the 172,500 children who are going to private schools now will get $10,500. And I don't think that's what the author intends, and I know that's not what this legislature would intend, because when we want to do ESAs, you want it to work. You want to make sure that the children that is targeted are going to benefit by virtue of the ESA. And an ESA for $10,500 is simply inadequate to help the children we say we're trying to help. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Frank, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield?
Does
Yes.
the gentleman yield for questions? The gentleman yields.
So if I understand your amendment, you would pay for a lower income person up to $30,000 for a private education. Is that right?
Correct. If you're 200% or less of poverty guidelines.
Okay. And you said the current amount wouldn't handle private schools. I'm not sure what private schools that you're looking at, but the average private school in the state of Texas, do you know what the average private school in the state of Texas cost? It's $9,700. $9,700 is the average private school. Not everybody, and I know a lot of people in here have sent their kids to private schools, and I know they go for a lot more than that. I know you can find
So your argument is let them all go to average private schools.
No, I mean, I think
then
there are some outstanding private schools that do it
but
for
you're saying that
$9,700.
you're arguing with me about average prices for charter schools and not the fact that you want every child to go to a charter school.
I want every child to be able to go to the best school that they can, that their parents think, but to pretend that you have to pay $30,000, I don't think you have to pay.
That's
I
not
don't
what
even think it's fair to pay $30,000.
Let me correct you. This bill doesn't automatically say you get $30,000.
Right.
This bill says you get up to $30,000.
Right. No,
depending
I'm
on what
aware
the
of that.
private school costs. Because some of the children might not want to go to average private schools.
Right. But I think, but the pretending that we can't somehow give people options at the dollar amount that we have, we truly can, and I think we can give them great options. So, appreciate it.
I'm not sure I agree with that. As I said before, what you were doing and professing is to give these children a 10-foot rope and they're in a 12-foot hole. And so how do you expect them to get out of it?
Thank you.
Mr. Kane, for what purpose?
Question for the amendment author.
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Mr. Dutton, you call the current funding mechanism a 10-foot rope. Are you willing to at least support them on that?
A 12-foot hole.
12-foot hole. Will you support them giving them a 10-foot rope, though?
I will do that. I will. I promise you I'll do that, and I'll come back there and stand there with you, and we'll have a great time celebrating it.
Excellent. Excellent. Which private school did your kids go to?
Well, my 7 kids didn't go to private school.
Private schools?
And my last child graduates from college on May 18th. And so every one of them has graduated from college, but they went to public school.
Would you know that there's over 150 Catholic schools in Texas that charge just $8,000 a year? Don't you think that'd be enough for these kids?
Well, I wish you hadn't brought that up because my school at my Catholic church, the Catholic Church closed it. So it doesn't matter what, and I asked in the hearing, if I asked the person who was representing Catholic schools, whether or not, if this passes, will you open the school in my district? They closed 2 private schools in my district, one at St. Francis and the other one at our Mother Mercy. And the lady said, well, that's not the way we do it. And I said, well, why are you here arguing for this bill if that's not going to help? She said, well, we have to look at other things other than this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at a minimum, though, did you know that what this bill is doing is the highest amount of an ESA of any other state in the country? This is the most that any other state's done for the ESAs.
Well, I know it, but we should learn from them that the way to do it is to structure this so that we make sure the children we are targeting actually get the benefit. And what we're doing here, based on what I've seen, is we're not helping them nearly as much as we're helping children who are already going to private. If you could show me where it's going to increase the number of students by 172,000, just like the 172,000 that are now going to private schools and who are now going to benefit from this, I would be fine with it. But it seems to me that we're going to have 172,000 of students who are currently in private schools benefiting from this ESA, and we may not get 50,000 students who are not going to private schools, who are the students we say we're trying to help. I listened to the governor.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman extend his time?
The motion to extend times. First extension. Is there any objection? Chair is none so extended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listen to the governor, and I listen to all of the people advocating for ESAs. And one of the things they start with, by putting a picture, a face on the ESA, is they start with children that I'm talking about in the 12-foot hole. That's who they start with. They start with saying, well, we got to help them. They're locked in these schools, and they ought to be given some way out. They ought to create an option for them. Well, if you're in a 12-foot hole and somebody sends you a 10-foot rope, that's not much of an option.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I yield.
Gentleman
Thank
yields for
you.
questions.
Rep. Dutton, if I was going to name your bill, I'd name it the equalizer, because I think that's what your bill is trying to accomplish. I also share the same concern that you have, which is although the wording of the bill does put the LMI, or the low to moderate income families, first in the wording, it concerns me that they will actually have access and be able to access this. Does it concern you that when we pass this kind of legislation, we often don't inform the public so that they are fully aware that they can take advantage of this kind of program?
Well, yeah, that's one of the problems with it is the children we're trying to help who are the hardest to reach, this bill makes no real effort to reach them.
Does it concern you that, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that when people are lower in income and socioeconomic status, they often don't have access to internet the way that other people do, even though we take it for granted because we have access every day, 24 hours a day?
Well, that's true, but I think people find out what they need to know, People will find that out. And what they're going to find out about this is that this was a program that was in some fashion designed to help them, but it really provided no help at all because they are caught. And so for those kids who don't have options and they remain in these low-performing schools, we don't offer this bill doesn't fix the schools they're coming from. Mm-hmm. This bill tries to provide them a way out. But I'm telling you that it in no way unlocks the door so that those kids can get out.
And I agree with you. That's why I think that putting it in black and white on paper makes it more concrete that they are actually going to get the help they need, not just saying, here's an offer, if you come up with the rest of the money, depending on what's available in your area, then you have access. I agree with you. The underlying concern that I share with you is I'm a mother of four. I know I had to navigate the public education system, and parents don't often have the resources or the time to sometimes just the basic information to know that, hey, the Texas legislature passed this law and now you can go apply for this. And even if they do know that, they don't always have the same resources as people who are in higher economic brackets have to take advantage of these programs. So I appreciate your amendment because it cuts through all of those setbacks that these families experience that may not be acknowledged by people who don't experience them. So
well, thank you for that. And I too have share the same concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Each for what purpose?
Will the representative yield for a couple questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I yield to my chairman.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you, Representative Dutton. I've been thinking about your analogy about being in a 12-foot hole and being given a 10-foot rope. And I understand the point you're trying to make, but I'm wondering myself, if I'm in a 12-foot hole and someone offers me a 10-foot rope, I'm taking that rope, right?
Well,
I can get out of that 12-foot hole with a 10-foot rope.
On a dream.
Well, most kids in Texas can, to use your analogy, if we just give them a 10-foot rope, they're going to get out of that hole.
Well, some of the kids like me get out of the hole without your help.
Agreed.
And I will tell you that happens all the time. That happens more often than not. But I don't want you to leave here this time and feel good about your conscience when you think you helped, but you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything to really help. And if you really want to help, what you'll do is look at the folks who need the help the most, and that's where you begin the help. You don't begin the help by saying, okay, we're going to make this one size fits all so that everybody now is chasing the same rainbow. And that's the only problem I have. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move passage.
Mr. Buckley in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. SB 2 is carefully crafted and worded to make sure that it prioritizes the most vulnerable students in Texas. As a matter of fact, priority 4 is capped at 20%, leaving 80% of the program open and available and eligible for those most vulnerable. The second priority group in SB 2 are families earning less than $67,000 a year. So I respectfully move to table this amendment.
Mr. Dutton to close on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is what the bill does already. This is what the bill does. The bill says that children with disabilities who were members of a household that was at or below 500% are first on the list. Then it says children who were members of a household with a total annual income that was at or below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines are second. That's not changed in my amendment. Those two things aren't changed. What's changed is this. The third category says children who were members of a household with a total annual income that was above 200% and below 500%. That's what it changes. That's what this amendment changes. This amendment says that, wait a minute, wait. For children who are below 200%, we're going to make sure that they get from 200 to 300%, they're going to get $10,000. And then again, it splits it up and says for children above 300%, but below 400%, they're going to get $7,500. And then for a child who is a member of a household with a total annual income that is 400% but below 500% of poverty guidelines, they'll get $5,000. And the way we structured this was, like again, I said, so that it fit within the $1 billion that's in this bill for ESAs. And so what I'm asking you to do is that further refine, all this amendment really does is further refines what's already in the bill to make it more applicable to income levels. It's already there because it talks about from 200 to 500. What my amendment simply did was divide that into 200 to 300 and 300 to 400. And so everything else remains the same, members. Now, I know, and let me close with this. I know that the fix is in. Some of you are going to vote with your head, not your heart, because I know that there are people who are holding you hostage to vote for it. And I know that some of you all are not listening and not understanding exactly what you're doing. But I may not come back next session, but promise me you'll come back next session and you'll start with the Harold Dutton Amendment because you'll find out this didn't work. And I move passage, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Dutton sends up an amendment. Mr. Buckley moves to table. The question occurs on the motion to table. A record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Buckley voting aye, Mr. Hunter voting aye, Mr. Dutton voting nay, Mr. Morgan voting aye, Mr. McQueenie voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 91 ayes and 47 nays, the motion to table prevails.
Thanks for the use of the whole.
Members, we do have a recognition. The chair recognizes Ms. Garcia of Bear for a recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, today, while we're in this body on this floor advocating for school finance, advocating for school vouchers. We had a group of students walk out of a school in my district, 8 of them. 7 of them brutally beat another student and then shot and killed him. This happened at 2 p.m. today. A 14-year-old child What's even worse is that this is the second time this week. Because just in Dallas, the same thing happened. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it? Is it our fault? Is it our fault because we didn't raise the age? Is it our fault because we have open carry? Is it our fault because we don't pay our teachers enough? Is it our fault because we don't have enough mental health in schools? A family is suffering tonight because their child went to school today and was murdered by his classmates. We have to be proactive. This is one too many, y'all. One too many. It keeps happening every day, every day, every day in the state of Texas. I ask you all, can we please make good policy that is legitimately going to save our children? We need resources. We don't need an $8 billion voucher. We really don't.
The chair advises the guests that under the rules of the House, demonstrations, outbursts by visitors in the gallery are strictly prohibited.
What we need is protection in our schools. What we need is fully funding the education of our students. What we need is to make sure that every unfunded mandate, like putting officers in all the schools, is fully funded. This is what we need from this body. So as we carry on the rest of today, I ask that we do so with honor, with respect, and as we share our deepest condolences with the families of these children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, please join us in observing a moment of silence. Thank you, members. Mr. Tinderholt, for what purpose?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Should we be making political statements during recognitions?
Mr. Tinderholt, at this time, the chair declines to answer hypothetical questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Tinderholt. Almost for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the representatives, I'm requesting the representative's comments be reduced to writing and placed in the journal.
Menju, you've heard the motion. If there is any objection, the chair is none so ordered. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Tallarico.
Chair recognizes Mr. Tallarico to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I know this amendment has gotten a lot of attention over the last few days. This amendment would send this private school voucher bill to the voters of Texas for their approval before it can be implemented. This idea to send the issue of vouchers to the voters originally came from Governor Rick Perry last year. And then a few weeks ago, a group of conservative grassroots activists came up with the idea of an amendment that would do exactly that. They call themselves MAGA moms. These are not activists I typically work with, but this issue of private school vouchers brings people together across the political spectrum. A few days ago, there was growing bipartisan support in this chamber for this common sense idea. But then the governor of our state started calling members into his office one by one and threatening to veto all the bills of any member who votes for this amendment, threatened to make their primary elections, quote, a bloodbath. So this morning, I decided to carry this amendment. Not only because it's a good idea, not only because it's what our constituents want, but also to make a very important point. No one, including the governor, should ever threaten a lawmaker. We do not serve the governor. We serve our constituents. The governor is saying that putting vouchers to the voters is unconstitutional. That's not true. The way I know it's not true is because, as Attorney General, Greg Abbott wrote about statewide referenda and never raised constitutional concerns. The governor is saying there is no historical precedent for sending vouchers to the voters. That's also not true. There were statewide referenda in 1986, 1989, and 2006 on controversial topics. Lastly, the governor is saying Texans have already voted on vouchers. That's also not true. One, because there are a lot more people in this state than Republican primary voters, and this voucher will affect all of us in ways both big and small. Second, I think we all know that the primaries last year were not fought on vouchers. None of the TV ads, none of the mailers that the governor funded against our colleagues were about vouchers. And so I'm a little confused because the governor has said private school vouchers are wildly popular. And so if he's telling the truth, I would think this referendum would have no trouble passing. I would also think the governor would welcome an opportunity to finally have a mandate on this controversial topic. Texans have been fighting about vouchers for 70 years. The first voucher bill was proposed in this Capitol in 1957, and we've been fighting about it ever since. So if any issue should go to the voters, it's this one. We're sending a lot less to the voters for their approval this session alone. And believe me, this body has been very clear that anytime taxes may go up, the taxpayers should have a say. And by creating a new parallel education system that will cost billions of dollars every biennium, this voucher bill will absolutely raise property taxes. And so I think the taxpayers should have a say before it's implemented. Members, regardless of where you are on this bill, you know that I'm passionately against vouchers. That's no secret. There are friends of mine in this chamber who are passionately for vouchers, and that's fine. That's what this body is all about. But let me just make a pitch on why we should all support letting the voters get their say. It's the only thing that'll put this issue to bed. Because believe me, even if this passes, we'll be back here next session and the session after that and the session after that fighting about vouchers, fighting about loosening regulations, fighting about expanding funding, fighting about changing eligibility. This fight will never end. The only way for it to end is for Texans to get their say on this issue. I know that you're under a lot of pressure from the governor. I know that. I get that. I know that's not easy. But last time I checked, this legislature was a separate and equal branch of our state government. The last time I checked, we still had separation of powers in this state. The last time I checked, this was still the people's house, not the governor's house. All of that is at risk with this vote on this amendment. So regardless of where you are on this bill, I'm asking you to stand with me on this amendment. Let Texans approve this measure. Let Texans get a say. I urge you to vote for this amendment for our constituents, for our Constitution, and for this House.
Ms. Goodwin, for what purpose?
Will the representative yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes, I yield.
The gentleman yields for questions.
So I believe you said this, but I heard several members the other day say that we have already voted on this issue. Have we voted on vouchers? Have we let the people of Texas vote on vouchers?
No, Representative Goodwin. We have had primary elections where members were targeted because of their vote on vouchers in the past, but as a proposition, as a referendum, vouchers has never been put to the voters.
And these members even suggested that in the general election we voted on vouchers. Did we vote on vouchers in the general election?
No, Representative Goodwin, this issue has never been put to the voters as a proposition or a referendum.
And when was the general election?
November of last year.
Do voters sometimes change their minds over time?
Sure, but
when new information becomes available?
Sure, but again, this issue has not been put to the general electorate, and that's why I think this amendment makes a lot of sense.
Have you noticed that since between last session and this session, we have vouchers has been a very big issue both times. Last session, we had our regular session and 4 special sessions, and now here we are again debating vouchers. But have you noticed a difference in the response from people around the state?
You know, I've certainly seen Texans in both political parties in all regions of the state express deep concerns about this bill, who it will benefit, and who it will hurt.
It seems to me...
Again, Representative Goodwin, I don't want to make this about the bill. I have my opinions on the bill. You'll hear my opinions throughout the debate today. I'm sure you've already heard my opinions in committee. That's no secret. The thing I'm asking us to do here is let Texans express their opinions in a formal, fair election where we can finally put this issue to bed one way or the other. Because if the voters approve it, then there is a clear mandate from the people of this state for private school vouchers, and then there's not really any room to try to fight against it in future sessions. Or if they reject it, there's not much room to try to expand this program or implement a program like it in the future. And so, at least, I don't know where other members are, I would like this issue to be behind us. I think the only way to get it behind us for good is by letting our constituents have the final word.
I agree with you. I think letting the people of Texas have their voice heard through an election on whether or not we should implement vouchers in the state makes sense. And I'm really curious what the harm is. Why are we finding objection to this?
You know, I don't want to question anyone's motives, but I will say that there's already going to be the bill. If you read the amendment, the election would be during the constitutional election later this year in November of 2025. That election is already scheduled. There's already going to be issues on the ballot. Again, this would not be one of those constitutional amendments. It would be a referendum on that same ballot, very similar to what they did in 1986, 1989, and 2006.
I've expressed to constituents in my district that I think it would be great to put this up to a vote, and I've had an immense response to that. Have you found the same thing?
I have, and you know what's interesting is that even the folks in my community who are passionately for private school vouchers also want it to be put to a vote. And so again, I hope this is something we can all agree.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Little, for what purpose?
motion to extend time.
Motion's been made. Any objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Mr. Little, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
Yes, I yield.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Representative Tallarico, I'm extremely concerned by your allegations of the governor's threats against members. Which members did he threaten? Which of my colleagues did he threaten?
I don't have permission from those colleagues to divulge their names.
It certainly wasn't me. I don't think the governor even has my phone number. I'm a lowly freshman.
Sure.
But surely you do know who the governor has threatened, right?
I certainly know members that he has threatened, yes.
Republican members, right?
Yes, sir.
And your contention is that their votes on the board later today will be based upon the threats of the governor, correct?
No, sir. I certainly hope that members of this body will vote their districts and vote their conscience. And to be honest with you, Representative Little, my experience in this chamber, even as a Democrat, I'm in the minority, certainly don't agree on every issue. I've found that even the members that I disagree with the most have a lot of integrity. It's why I enjoy working in this chamber. And I've known this House to be independent. I've known this House to be courageous. And that gives me a lot of faith in this process, even when things don't go my way on the floor, which is most of the time, as you can imagine.
I share your faith in this process and the faith in the members here. And I believe that, and I think you'll agree that the lights that are going to go up on the board here later today, they are the product of sincere disagreement about this topic and not the threats of the governor. Wouldn't you agree?
I certainly hope that's true, yes.
And you believe in the Texas Constitution, yes?
Yes, sir.
In fact, you, right alongside me, I think your desk is back there, you took an oath in this very room to uphold that Constitution, correct?
Yes, sir.
So Article 3 of the Texas Constitution vests the legislature with power in this state and in this chamber and in the Senate to make laws, does it not?
Yes, sir.
And Article 3 of the Texas Constitution provides that no law, none, zero, no laws shall be passed except by bill, doesn't it?
Yes, I'm amending the bill. Yes, sir.
And Article 3 provides that bills may originate in either house and when passed may be amended, offered, or rejected by the other, right?
Yes, sir.
So the House can reject it or the Senate can reject it.
That's right.
Not the voters in the state, correct?
Well, no, that's incorrect because these bills can be amended to require voter approval. I mentioned in my layout the times in our state's history that we've done this. One in the 1980s was Governor Mark White was trying to make the State Board of Education appointed by the governor rather than elected by the people. And so they passed a bill, but they said the voters are going to have to sign off on this before it happens. So it went to the voters. The voters rejected it, and that's why Texans still elect their State Board of Education members. But then there was also the example of horse racing, and again, this was before I was born, so I don't know the exact details of the horse racing issue. But that issue was put to the voters, and the voters approved it, and so then it became law. So it goes both ways, whether voters reject it or approve it. But as long as it's done by the legislature, Representative Little, I will certainly grant there is no citizen-led referendum in Texas. That's not allowed, as we all know. But the legislature can authorize a statewide referendum.
And Representative Tallarico, my understanding is this program is a $1 billion program, correct?
This voucher program?
Yes.
In the first biennium, yes. The fiscal note says it's going to grow to $7 billion in the second biennium.
Why did we not seek a statewide referendum on the over $8 billion educational funding bill we just passed? Why weren't you up there offering to amend that?
Well,
and send that to the voters.
I would certainly be open to sending as many big investments to the voters as possible. The thing I would say is particularly special about this issue is how controversial it is and how controversial it has been throughout our state's history. There's not a lot of debate for and against paying teachers. As you saw with the board on this issue, there was unanimous or near unanimous consent from this body to fund our public schools, even though I don't think it's quite enough. I do think this issue is different. As you know, there is bipartisan opposition to vouchers. It failed to pass in the last legislative session because of bipartisan opposition. And then I would add one more thing, which is the influence of big money on this topic in particular. As you know, Jeff Yass, an out-of-state billionaire,
I believe this is personalities, is it not?
Gave $12 million to Greg Abbott.
Members, you shall confine your remarks to the topic at hand and not bring personalities into this matter.
If we're going to delegate, Representative Tallarico, if we're going to delegate our lawmaking authority directly to the people, why do we need to be here at all? Why don't we just do that with every bill? Is there a good reason to do that?
I would say, and this is just my opinion as a member of the body, is that when an issue is going to have such an impact, such a historic impact on such a critical service like public education, when an issue may raise, and I think will raise, people's property taxes across the state, then that issue, especially when there is bipartisan opposition, especially when there is historical controversy about the issue, to me, and again, Representative Little, this is not up to me, this is up to our body, but I think this body is justified in sending this issue to the voters for their approval because of its impact on public education, because of its impact on taxes. And I agree with the members of this body in past sessions that taxpayers should have the final say before their taxes go up. And I think that applies to this bill more so than many others.
But how does this body decide which bills rise to the question of needing to go to the voters and which bills are important for us to vote upon? For example, we just passed a bill related to education that's over 8 times the size of this one, and there was no animus in this body to send it by referendum to the voters. So how do you suggest that we decide which controversial issues that may or may not have bipartisan opposition that we send to the voters?
So I'll give 2 thoughts. One is, how do we decide? The people in this body decide with those lights up on the board. That's how we make big decisions. That's how we make big decisions on a whole host of topics. Second, I just outlined in my own personal opinion how I would consider sending certain issues to the voters. And I think depending on the scope, depending on the impact on services and taxes, and depending on the level of controversy and opposition, to me, as a lawmaker, as an individual lawmaker, those would play heavily into my decision on whether something should get voter approval.
So Representative Talarico, if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, it sounds like we as a body should decide this issue is simply too important for us to consider in the Texas House of Representatives, and it must be considered by the people. Well, and then we just vote and decide, yes, we all agree this issue is too important for us to consider, and the voters must vote on it on the ballot.
One thing I would clarify, Representative Little, is that by passing the bill, let's assume we put on this amendment that would require voter approval before implementation, then I would assume the bill would pass with that amendment on it. And so we as a legislature, it's not that we're abdicating our responsibility, we are designating this issue in particular for voters to decide. So just by sending it to the voters, we are already designating this as an issue of importance. We're not just saying we're gonna vacate our jobs and we're just going to send every single item that comes before the legislature to the voters. That's not what I'm advocating for. What I'm advocating for is if we as a body deem that an issue is of such historical importance and will have such an impact on a key service like education and on taxes, that issue rises to the level that we should seek voter approval.
Why is it historically important?
Representative Little, I'll just add that this is not up to me. The only way we will get voter approval on this issue is if this body decides to do so. And that is true on any item that we take up. And so I'm just coming as one legislator, and I'm saying that I believe that this issue rises to the level that we should get voter approval. And again, there is historical precedent. I would, when looking at those historical examples, the reason that those were sent to the voters is because they were particularly controversial, because the body was unclear on its stance on that issue. And so those issues were put to the voters, others were not. And all I'm doing is proposing that the issue of vouchers, because of its historical controversy, because of its bipartisan opposition, and because of the impact it will make on Texans, I think, as an individual legislator, that this issue rises to the level of seeking voter approval. And Representative Little, if you disagree, and I respect your opinion if you disagree, I would encourage you to vote no on the amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Little, for what purpose?
Never mind. Thank you.
That was hilarious.
Chair recognizes Dr. Buckley in opposition to the amendment.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, respectfully, I move to table.
Fuck you guys.
Get to him. Mr. Tallarico to close.
Okay.
Mr. Tallarico to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. I think if any issue should go to the voters, it should be this one. Again, I also think this amendment is particularly important because of the pressure and the threats made by the executive branch. Chairman Buckley is a friend of mine, but I think that the motion to table, rather than allowing this to be will of the House, is an example of that influence from the executive branch. And as a member, I resent that. I ask you to stand up for your constituents.
Ms. Wiener, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for some
The gentleman
questions?
yield for some questions.
Yes, I yield.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you. Representative Tallarico, you and I have had multiple conversations about the potential constitutionality of this language, correct?
Yes, I believe strongly in the Constitution and would never want to bring an amendment to the floor that would threaten or violate that Constitution.
So you and I both believe strongly this amendment is consistent with the Texas Constitution based on history and based on our reading of the text.
Yes, Legislative Budget Board, Legislative Reference Library have also confirmed.
Okay. And so, Representative Tallarico, Section 9 of the bill. I'm sorry, y'all, I can't hear. Section 9 of the bill has a severability clause, correct?
Of the amendment?
No, I'm sorry, of the bill. So Section 9 of the bill, as I understand it, says that if this legislation is challenged in court, that the different sections of the bill are severable from each other.
Yes.
And so that means, my understanding, tell me if you agree, is that if you and I were wrong, which we don't think we are, but if we were wrong and this language was not constitutional, this language would not endanger the underlying legislation from going into effect. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So members, regardless of the potential constitutionality, which we believe it's constitutional, would not endanger this underlying bill by supporting your referendum. Is that correct?
Yes, this is a constitutional, this amendment is constitutional. This amendment has historical precedent, but if for some reason it was still challenged in court and it was somehow deemed unconstitutional, it would not threaten the bill itself.
Okay. Thank you so much for offering this, Representative Tallarico.
Thank you, Representative. I move adoption.
Mr. Tallarico sends up an amendment. Mr. Buckley has moved to table the amendment. The question occurs on the amendment to table. A record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Representative Leach voting aye, Mr. Buckley voting aye, Mr. Hunter voting aye, Mr. Harris voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 86 ayes and 62 nays, the motion to table prevails.
There we go. We got her done.
The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment. Chair, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Turner.
Chair recognizes Mr. Turner to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is an amendment to strike the enacting clause. I want to read something to you. It's short. A general diffusion of knowledge being essential to the preservation of the liberties and rights of the people. It shall be the duty of the legislature of the state to establish and make suitable provision for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. Members, that's from Article 7, Section 1 of the Texas Constitution. You see, the framers of our Constitution understood way back in the 19th century that knowledge is the key to preserving our liberties that we hold dear as Texans, as Americans. And to ensure the citizens have knowledge, we must support our public schools so our kids can learn. Not just learn facts and knowledge, though that's important, but to learn to think. The framers of our Constitution understood that. But here we stand in the Texas House of Representatives, the People's House, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, on the precipice of undermining a foundational, elemental promise of this state. Are we ready, are we really willing to trade an efficient system of public free schools that serve all children for an inefficient system of private, expensive schools that will only serve a privileged few? That is the question we have to answer. SB 2 will irrevocably harm the future of our state. We know our public schools are already underfunded. The governor's provided $0 in new basic funding for our local schools in the past 6 years. Now, we took one step forward a few hours ago on this floor with the passage of HB 2, and I thank Chairman Buckley for his work and leadership on that. But if this bill passes, Senate Bill 2 passes, and siphons $1 billion from our neighborhood public schools, it will be much more than 2 steps back. And for what? For a program, a scam that we have seen fail time and time again across this country. Arizona was the first state in the nation to enact a universal school voucher scam, and I think the Arizona example is a good one to look at because the former governor of that state was here a couple weeks ago promoting this bill. Since Arizona passed its plan, the program has ballooned in cost by 560%, causing a budget shortfall and cuts to critical state programs. It's been overwhelmingly used by wealthy parents who already had the resources to send their kids to private schools. And the program has shown absolutely no evidence of improved student outcomes, and supposedly that's what this is all about. Adding insult to injury, in Arizona, private school parents, voucher recipients have used ESA funds for ski lessons, home gyms, and trips to SeaWorld. Governmental efficiency and responsible stewardship of tax dollars is one of our greatest priorities as legislators. So let's call vouchers what they are. They're a coupon for the wealthy who can already afford to send their kids to private schools. Just look at private schools in my region, up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. For a family that can already afford to pay the more than $29,000 in tuition to send their kids to Oak Ridge in Arlington, a great school, this voucher will be a coupon for them. But even with that coupon, a family that can't currently afford to send their kids there aren't going to be able to make up that $19,000 difference. I could go on with other examples, but this voucher will not cover the cost of private schools at our best private schools in the state. And I would add that those high tuition prices don't cover activity fees, application fees, registration fees, extracurricular fees, book fees, etc. So that lack of accountability that we saw in Arizona that allowed state dollars to be spent on frivolous expenses also means that our tax dollars are funding private, often for-profit schools that are wholly unaccountable to the state and to the laws that this legislature passes. That lack of accountability means there's nothing to stop a for-profit, fly-by-night shell company from setting up a new private school in some strip center in my district or yours. And guess what? I would predict that their tuition will be set at exactly the amount of this ESA. And While our public school students have their learning and progress measured throughout the year and through end of course STAR tests, private schools have no such testing requirements to guarantee that kids are learning. Private schools aren't responsible for following any of the school safety requirements that we have passed to keep students safe. They don't even have to ensure teachers are qualified to teach or even have passed a basic background check. So, lastly, members, I think it is important that we talk about the origins of the voucher scam. Vouchers in this state originated back to the 1950s. In the wake of the Brown versus Board of Education decision that desegregated schools in the United States. And after that Supreme Court decision, that landmark decision, Texas shamefully established a committee to study segregation in public schools and to examine and propose ways around the Supreme Court ruling. And that's where the idea of vouchers was born. And 71 years later, vouchers are still discriminatory in different ways, but still discriminatory. Vouchers will harm students with disabilities. They will harm rural students especially. They will harm students who need additional learning supports. They harm our retired teachers, we have learned. And they will harm low-income and middle-income students. So members, I offer this amendment today to kill Senate Bill 2 for my constituents, for the public school students of my district, for the teachers and staff who work hard every day to serve them, and for the preservation of our state's public education system. And I would encourage you to join me in voting yes on this amendment. Move adoption.
The chair recognizes Dr. Buckley to speak against the amendment.
Member
Mr. Tallarico, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield for some questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes. Gentleman yields.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley. I want to, since we're talking about the whole bill, have a chance to ask you some questions about SB 2. So first, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. The student has to be accepted by the private school before they can get the voucher. Is that correct?
Well, they can apply for the ESA, get in the program, but they do have to be accepted to and be admitted into a private school enrolled.
And there's no requirement in the bill that the private school must accept a student who is applying for the voucher?
There's no automatic enrollment. No, they do not have to.
So the ultimate decision about who participates in this program lies with the private school, not the parent. Is that correct?
Yeah, it relies on the admission standards and what a private school will do to make sure that it's a good fit for that child to receive the best education.
So it's not so much school choice as it is the school's choice. Is that correct?
No, it's parents' choice. I mean, a parent chooses that pathway, and they're the ones that are driving driving that decision, and parents will seek the environment that's best for their kids. That's what happens in my district, anyway.
But we just established that the ultimate decision doesn't lie with the parent. It lies with the private school that can deny admission to any kid for any reason.
Well, there's standards in as far as transfers in public schools where they don't take every transfer, every child that shows up. If they want to transfer, they don't even allow students to transfer from campus to campus. There's always a standard for admittance.
But the local
unless your zip code dictates it.
But the local neighborhood school can't deny you admission. Is that correct?
If you're in the zone, you're admitted.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about the fiscal impacts of this bill. What is the projected cost of the bill in the first biennium?
$1 billion.
And what is the projected cost of the bill in the second biennium?
Well, it's projected and it's based upon estimates and guesses of students that would participate, and at this time we just don't know, and it's in the future it's entirely subject to appropriation.
But Legislative Budget Board does forecast what it will cost in the second biennium in the fiscal note.
Yeah, they make an estimate using assumptions.
And what is that estimate for what this program will cost in the second biennium?
Oh, I'll have to look it up. It's an estimate, but it is subject to this body, the appropriation.
Sure, I understand how that process works, but I'm asking what the estimate is for the cost of the program in the second biennium.
Well, based on some of their assumptions and all that, it could increase to levels $3 billion a year. It may or may not do that. We literally don't know, and it is subject to appropriation. So it'll really be whatever this body decides to invest.
So the forecast is that in the second biennium, this program would cost $7.1 billion. Is that correct?
That's LBB's assumptions.
Yes. And in the Education Committee, you called the Legislative Budget Board that wrote this fiscal note, quote, the gold standard.
Well, it's gold standard for what we do here. It's required that the LBB weigh in on fiscal notes on all legislation that we
So the gold standard, the LBB is projecting that this voucher program will grow to $7.1 billion in the second biennium.
Yeah.
The school finance bill we heard earlier, what was the total cost of that?
It was about $8 billion.
I want to talk about who will be getting these taxpayer funds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what the Legislative Budget Board is forecasting for what percentage of voucher recipients in the first year will be students already enrolled in private school?
They make a certain assumption. I don't recall what they.
Is it true that the Legislative Budget Board is forecasting that 65% of the voucher recipients in the first year will be students who are already in private school?
Yeah, that's the assumption that they're operating under in their analysis.
In the second year, the LBB is estimating that 78% of the voucher recipients will be kids who are already in private school. Does that sound correct to you?
That's their assumption.
And that's exactly what we've seen in other states, Mr. Chairman, that the vast majority of the voucher money ends up going to parents who are already sending their kids to private school to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's why the costs explode
Yeah.
in the out years. In Arkansas, do you know what percentage of current voucher recipients were already in private school to begin with?
I'm not advised on that.
It's 82%. In New Hampshire, do you know what percentage of current voucher recipients were already in private school to begin with?
I do not.
It's 75%. In Florida, do you know what percentage of current voucher recipients were already in private school to begin with?
I'm not aware of that.
It's 70%.
Okay.
In fact, I can't find a single state where the majority of voucher recipients weren't already in private school to begin with. So with this bill, we're taking money out of general revenue that could go to our underfunded public schools, and we're giving that money to parents who are already sending their kids to private school. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, it's really unknown who will apply. We do know that low-income, low-income families and single parents, and at least in my district, are participating in private schools now. And these are not wealthy families, and they would certainly qualify under this bill. And I think it's entirely appropriate that they are here that they're able to apply for this and gain some assistance in sending their kids to the school of their choice.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to go off the best numbers we have, which is from the gold standard, in your words, the Legislative Budget Board, and they are forecasting that the vast majority of the students who get this voucher are going to be kids who are already in private school.
Yeah.
You said that this program costs $1 billion in the first year. Do you know if we gave that $1 billion to our underfunded public schools, how much that money could raise teacher pay